I invite up the first speaker of the Affirmative team.
When families are left shivering because they cannot afford the increasing prices of energy, they tragically suffer. When families living on the coast lose their house and belongings to increased flooding and sea level rise, they tragically suffer. Team Hawke's Bay tells you that we are the team that has taken the future of Aotearoa into our hands by prioritizing the impending issues of climate and the energy crisis. 3 substantives that I'll bring to you in this debate. Firstly, how do we combat the energy crisis? Secondly, how do we improve the environmental outcomes in New Zealand? And thirdly, Isabella will provide you a split on the benefits for EV. Before I get into my substantives, some modelling for you. We stand for the fast-tracking approval process. This looks like all of the things in the info slide that we got, but also this looks like further things like the law, such as like how locally affected iwi must be consulted and how the environmental minister can be brought in if deemed relevant. We think that the ministers will be listening to the 12 experts because they are incentivized to, because if they don't, they will cause scandal, which is extremely detrimental to their reputation, which means that they can lose their position in power and they can have their jobs taken away. Note that these projects will have to comply with the health and safety issues. Okay, moving into my first substantive on how we combat the energy crisis. For some context, there is currently an energy crisis because particularly with like the climate change, it getting worse, it means that the weather gets colder in the winter, which means that people have to start using electricity more to keep their houses warm, to cook meals, to do all the things that they need to do. The demand of energy like significantly like goes over the supply that we have, which means that we currently like run out of energy. We saw an example of this 2 weeks ago when the entire country was told to start like limiting the amount of energy they use. The cost, note also that the cost of electricity is extremely high. It's like around $500 to $600 per month for the average family. So moving on to my mechanisms. Firstly, projects will be built sooner. Currently in the status quo, project consenting takes like a decade, whereas on our side of the house, we're able to like get these projects faster because they are like done by like a fast track like approval. On the comparative, why does on their side does it take longer? Firstly, local councils have like scarcity of resources. They need like a lot of manpower to like go through with these consents, to go through with these processes, which is just extremely like time consuming on their side of the house. Whereas on our side of the house, the panel on our side of the house is likely going to be focusing specifically on like the few renewable projects that are brought forward to us. Second, so this means that we will have, moving on, this means that we will have more projects. Because of like the time costing, companies are going to be interested in renewable energies and incentivized to make more projects to get like, because they have like a lot of competition, because a lot of companies are going to be wanting to put a lot of renewable energy. They want to do like the best, they want to be the best so they can get the best for their company. On the comparative, we just don't get this because firstly, they don't have enough time to get all these projects out. So that means that they can't get more projects out. Okay, moving on. Moving on to the third mechanism on how we get like more reduced costs. Going through consented projects, you have to employ a lot of people, lawyers, architects, planners. Whereas on our side of the house, you like start to get like we like reduce time. We like by reducing the time that we spend on these projects, we reduce the amount of cost that we put into these projects because we have to employ less people. What are some of the outcomes of this point? The outcomes of this point are that we get more energy that is cheaper because it is produced in New Zealand. It's like this is fundamentally important because this means that families are able to use energy to keep their families warm, to keep people warm, to cook food if they need to, and thirdly, schools will be able to use energy to have technology in the classrooms to be able to give students the best education that they need. Secondly, companies will have stability on our side of the house. We're not gonna have companies being told on short notice that they have to cut down on their energy and how much energy that they're using, because we already have a lot of projects, because we have the renewable energy on our side of the house that we need. This is good for everyone because it means that our families are not going to have to spend more monies because these companies are having to increase their prices because of how many cuts they have to make and how much they have to put in to doing these efforts. Third outcome, this allows us to take stronger stances overseas. When we have power and sustainable energy, we don't have to rely on bad actors such as Russia, the Russian oils, such as the Indonesian coals. We have renewable energy on our own. It means that we're seen better, in a sustainable light. We're seen in a good light on the world stage. Okay, fourthly, renewable energy lasts forever while coal is finite. This means that over time, coal and oil will get expensive and will become a dwindling supply, which is why renewable energy is uniquely more better because it attracts more people and it is more attractive to consumers.
Point.
Actually, I'll take a point before I move on.
Okay. Do you not think that once you make everything so much quicker and reduce a bunch of costs, you end up with lower quality energy, making it overall really worse for everyone? You only put a short-term fix to a long-term issue.
See, in my first point, I've already defined how we don't have this because we have a panel of experts figuring out these research. We don't get this on outside the house. They will just try to come back on it a second, but this is just not true. Okay, moving on to my second point on how we improve the environmental outcomes. When you have more renewable energy, you have backup supplies. Renewable energy is no longer the backup supply. It is the main supply, so you won't rely on oil and coal, which are just really bad of supplies to focus on. Secondly, renewable projects are environmentally friendly. So why is this? As I've already flagged, and as I've already told you before, coal and oil are finite resources of energy. They take a millennia to produce. They produce a lot of carbon dioxide into the environment, which means that it causes a lot of pollution and climate change. Why is pollution so bad on our side? Why is pollution so bad? Pollution is really bad because it means that you get a lot of bad carbon emissions into the environment. Okay. What are some of the outcomes of this point? We're able to reduce pollution on our side of the house because we don't have a lot of carbon emissions. We don't get a lot of smog, which is seen in Invercargill, where it means that we're able to prevent respiratory diseases on our side of the house because we don't get all these negative impacts of pollution. Secondly, we get reduction in carbon emissions. Even if they try to prove that we don't get the significant number of reduction in in carbon emissions, any sort of carbon emission reduction is important because we're on track for a 3 degree rise in the global temperature. So even if we get a 0.01 reduction of carbon emission, it's crucial because it can save millions of lives from droughts, from floods. And thank you, very proud to propose.
I thank the speaker for their speech and now invite the first speaker of the negative team to start their team's case.
The energy crisis didn't start because now we need more like electricity or because of this demand increases. This demand increases because companies and large corporations use their power inefficiently, and the fact that these costs have gotten so high is because people are trying to put these short-term things in place at a high quality, which makes these prices really high. If they want to win on the energy crisis, we'll try and win on it too. Firstly, on the principle of a democracy, and secondly, why local communities get better environmental outcomes, and thirdly, why we get better social outcomes. Firstly, on the principle of democracy, right? Having 3 people in general deciding on huge projects clearly undermines democracy and the perspective of the perspectives of the public for 5 reasons. Firstly, it is difficult to appeal to the court. Secondly, you're unlikely to have a variety in opinion when you just select like 3 people from the population, and given these people are rich, we think it's even less likely. Thirdly, it discourages local involvement because even if they are good, good people that you care about so much, they have all this power, so they are less likely to take in the opinions of as many people as possible. When they give us a characterization that the law means that they have to talk to like every person and get all these perspectives, this is inherently untrue. There's no law telling you when you're building a project you have to go talk to all these different perspectives. This comes from the kindness of the person's heart, and even if they're going to do this, we think more perspectives are going to be gathered on our side because there is more incentive to. And fourthly, even if they do talk about like talk to a huge amount of people, they're unlikely to put it at the forefront, but because it appears they already have talked to a lot of these people, which means that this democracy is basically for show. They have this power, they can abuse it in any way they want. Even if they do take all these opinions into account, people can be shown like very perspectives to their own because this data can be manipulated, right? We saw in government when they promised to take the opinions of these people into parliament about this, 2/3 of this data was taken out to show people that, this group of people don't actually care. Comparatively, we have more people working in the council who get a say on the issue, right? We get a more diverse group of people because the council workers tend to be in the middle class. They're normally workers who are more integrated into the average society, whereas in the status quo right now, those 3 ministers are members of the National Party, and when they get elected into things like environmental issues, they probably don't care too much about those minority perspectives because they have no incentive to, because they have to appeal to the majority of these voters. The impacts of this is that we get a better range of people working on these projects, right? Because they consider democracy and ensure that everyone, or at least more people, have a say on our side of the house. Secondly, we're a democratic country in general, so you're literally undermining the system when you allow like a couple people to depict what can happen to the energy and to the like environmental situation of a local group. Secondly then, onto why local councils get better environmental outcomes. Firstly, they have knowledge that is specific to the area, right? Workers of the council have grown up or at least lived in this area for a significant amount of time. For example, one council worker may have grown up like near a river, and therefore they have been taught or seen how these environmental consequences have affected that river, and they know how to best deal with it or know what other people might think about this issue, right? B, they are also incentivized to care more and have the best outcome because they are intrinsically motivated by the fact that this is their hometown, and also this is where the future generations of their family are going to continue to live. Comparatively, a nationalized approach on their side is worse because they miss out on specific details because they're working on that grand scale. They're trying to look at the whole country in general without focusing on that one specific area that they're trying to improve. We know that when you try solve a climate issue on a large scale, it often doesn't occur because no changes occur. When you have small scale things, you get this build up of actual good incentives and good solutions, which means that you can develop it on a grand scale. And also B, the ministers don't have the in-person experience of the area. Thirdly, we also get better research and data in general, right? Because often data is used on a national scale and is very general because they can't spend so much time with like 3 people and a group of experts to go through every single project a local data research company has done, or the personal research you can do. So this means that local councils often conduct monthly or annual reports of their environment or their city. We think this is mutually exclusive to our side because the fast track process speeds up everything and cuts the comprehension of the area. What did they tell us here then? Firstly, they told us that you get more local community the local councils don't have money or resources to put into this. Firstly, we think this is inherently wrong because the businesses are the ones paying for these projects. It's not like the council is chipping in millions of dollars for this project. The business is the one who's trying to gain the profit. They're the one putting in the cost, right? Secondly, we tell you that they told us that the local community communities don't have the time, the local council doesn't have the time. We flip this when we tell you that a nationalized strategy is actually more inefficient, because when you have people like ministers, they have a lot of other jobs outside of just being those resource consent people. They also have international affairs that they have to deal with, not just the local affairs. We think local affairs is much more minimal. Thirdly, they also told us about how you have lower costs. They have lower energy costs, right? We think that if you have lower energy costs, this means it only happens in the short term because you did it in such a quick way, and we think it's going to be low quality if it's going to be low cost. If they make it so it is at a different cost, this means that they have to put so much money into having high quality in the short term, which means that it's going to cost even more than what it costs on our side of the house. Okay, thirdly then, on why we get better social outcomes. Before that, I'll take a POI.
The Manapuri Dam powers over 600,000 homes each year. How would these middle-class perspectives oppose hydroelectric schemes?
We don't think they'll oppose hydroelectric schemes. We think they're more likely to know about these hydroelectric schemes and how they impact the people in the area, with the needs of the people in the area, but beyond science. We get the science as well, and we get the outcomes of having better perspectives. Okay, thirdly, on why we get better social outcomes. Firstly, we get more discussions with people who care or are stakeholders of the project, right? Because the council members are affected by this. This is unique to our side, as the ministers often come from privileged backgrounds, so they haven't encountered the issues that affect marginalized communities, or even if they have, we think it's much more minimal. Even if they are very aware of these issues, they don't really have an incentive to care, because they have that incentive of the voters. They want to maintain their voter base. They want to gain the new swing voters, right? And secondly, National has never tried to win over the minorities, in which the three current ministers right now are from National. We don't think they're able to convince the people they're able to get those perspectives in the first place. They're already probably disliked by the minority groups because they have a reputation of picking the larger majority, and comparatively, the council understand their people better and they're more incentivized to help these minority groups affected, right? Firstly, this is because they're more incentivized by being re-elected. This is exclusive because people vote for council candidates based on how they represent their views in a local context. This is focused around the environmental laws, the transportation, and the layout proposals they have. Whereas on the other hand, people vote for these MPs who become these ministers based on pure politics, right? This looks like people voting for Ryan Hamilton being elected because he is from National, not because of his individual perspectives of a place in general. It's because he's more right-wing, or they might vote more left-wing just because they're on that side of the political spectrum, not because people like him as an individual. Whereas on our side, people vote for these people in the local councils because they like their perspectives, they like the fact that they're getting their perspectives as well. What this means is that A, the local council represents the local views better, and B, that if they do make a bad decision, they're more likely to be removed by the people. Therefore, they have a greater incentive to actually voice these perspectives. The impacts of this is, most importantly, we get better considerations of minority perspectives. They're the one most influenced. We see the huge projects that take down their land, take down their environment. We think if we can prove we get better minority perspectives in this case, we win this debate.
I thank the speaker for their speech, and now welcome the second speaker of the Affirmative team.
In this debate, we aren't talking about every single environmental project that is going to cause councillors to have a say, that is going to require them to need to comment on everything because everybody's land is going to be affected. What we are talking about is a specific small amount but hugely impactful renewable energy projects that will only occur maybe 5 per year. That is 5 plots of land. All of the outcomes they're talking about you're needing to have a say because you have all this regional knowledge just simply aren't that impactful when you come to terms with the fact that it is just 5 renewable energy projects that are actually able to help thousands of people, but are only going to take up a small amount of land. A couple of things in this debate. Firstly, talking about the energy crisis, which we think is most critical because it impacts literally every New Zealander. Secondly, on environmental outcomes and whether or not a national approach or a regional approach is going to be better for this. And then just lastly on democracy, before moving on to my split point, about how we are able to benefit iwi specifically on our side of the house through fast tracking of renewable energy projects. So starting off with on what causes the energy crisis. They told us it's not the lack of energy, it is actually inefficient use. At best, this is symmetric, right? On their side of the house, you still have inefficient use of electricity. We don't see how that is solved. What if even if it somehow is inefficient, we should surely just produce more energy so we are able to meet the demand, rather than people having to pay exorbitant amounts of money in order to access energy, or families going without energy in the freezing cold of winter and being literally freezing in their homes. But secondly, we tell you that because the cost of energy is so high, we think it's highly unlikely that you as a company are going to be using energy efficiently. If you're wanting to cut prices, if you're wanting to cut costs because we're in a cost of living crisis, the first thing you might look to is how can I better use energy more efficiently? This basically means there's a huge incentives on companies to use energy efficiently, and we just don't think that that is the reason that we have this energy crisis. The actual reason for the energy crisis is simply a shortage. It is simply the instability. It is the fact that when we go into winter, our backup supply of energy isn't renewables, it is coal, and we think that is so detrimental. They told us, secondly, that in terms of the energy crisis, we aren't able to solve it because we get low quality energy. Firstly, what does low quality energy look like? We think all electricity is good electricity, right? As long as it's renewable, that's all we really care about. And secondly, we tell you that the kind of large long-term costs they're talking about simply isn't true, because if you're a company, you have you wanting to help your shareholders want to have faith in you that in the long term you're not suddenly going to have to front up huge amounts of money in order to keep your company alive. Basically what this shows is that on our side of the house we are able to fix the energy crisis because they didn't disagree with the fact that we are that currently consenting processes take a decade. So if we are able to just get projects quicker, we are able to solve the energy crisis quicker. We are able to keep people warm, and that is so important in this debate. But secondly, on the speediness of on how we are actually able to do this, what did we hear? What was their response? They had, well, no, it isn't very speedy, the fast track consenting process, because ministers have to deal with other affairs. We think that ministers have a specific ministerial portfolio. It might be regional development, it might be infrastructure. We think because it's your portfolio, you have to care about it, because otherwise voters are just going to simply vote you out of power, and that is an extremely strong incentive on you. And secondly, we tell you that because you are creating a new law, there's a new focus on this, which means that ministers are going to put significant amount of time and energy to ensure that the fast track approvals process is actually fast, is actually speedy. But rather on their side of the house, when we have all these things about how councillors are going to be able to able to do it quickly because they have councillors who have specific regional knowledge, this doesn't negate the fact that councillors are under-resourced. They currently do not have money. That was not negated by them. And furthermore, we think that these councillors are actually the ones that don't have a specific portfolio. The councillors are the ones that are having to think about a trillion different things every day, are bombarded with public feedback. They don't have the time, and that is what is taking so long. But secondly, on environmental outcomes, we basically, so as I flagged in my introduction, we don't think that the environmental harms are going to be so significant as they are making it out to be. But secondly, let's look at the sort of claim we had that because you have local knowledge, you are able to get better environmental outcomes. Firstly, we tell you, as we heard it on Shika, the law requires you to consult with locally affected iwi. This is the kind of local knowledge that the negating team cares about. Secondly, the kind of local knowledge needs to be scientific, right? If you're talking about implementing a project, you need to have information about how the building is going to be constructed. You need to have all of this very specific information that councillors don't have, because ultimately they are political leaders in their community. They are not scientists. And just lastly, we think that, as I also stated, they don't have the time. They are unable to get to acquire all of this knowledge because they are so busy focused on everything else, and they aren't paid enough in order to deal with it. Before I move on, I will take a POI if you have one.
when you tell us that the local councils are bombarded with public feedback and therefore can't do things, wouldn't you say that ministers get more because they're seen by the majority of the nation?
I think that ministers often have like personal security, like personal assistants to deal with that sort of thing. Councillors are on their own, they don't have that. Secondly, how do we actually improve environmental outcomes with this national approach? We're talking about like, they told us that because it's so large scale and you lack specific research, we just don't think these things apply, because when you're talking about like renewable energy projects, you don't require like specific research about like, oh, what kind of like the specific plot of land. You're just like, you're building like a windmill that's going to go there. You're obviously going to employ scientists. You're able to like have the money to go and like employ people to do this research for you. Those are the kind of things you're able to do when you are at a national level and you're like an economy of scale and you have access to all of those things. So what was their main push? Their main push is like democracy is impeded and we're like undermining democracy. So firstly, as I stated, just one aspect, right? Like democracy still exists in like the exact same form for everything else. It's just specifically for renewable energy projects. Secondly, we tell you that people do still have a say. We've spoken a bit about how iwi must still be consulted. Thirdly, in terms of like court appeals, they told you like, oh, now you can't like have any form or any way of talking back. Like you can still go and protest if you so like, if the like outcome is so bad. And secondly, we tell you there's an incentive for you not to have a bad outcome, because otherwise then you're going to get voted out of power. Otherwise you lose all of that control and all of that influence. But just lastly on how this is going to benefit iwi. We think that iwi and Māori have a unique connection to Te Raiao and that they're wanting to protect the environment. We think that they may not have the money or the ability to do so due to like persecution by the Crown historically. This means that we need to find a shorter, cheaper process and way for iwi to be able to manufacture and create their own energy to help Māori who are in poverty due to systemic racism. We think that this project offers a unique way of doing that. We tell like Māori are still able to access this as well. This means that they are able to produce energy. They're able to set their own prices for their communities. They're able to keep their own families warm and look after their own people. We think this is particularly important as Māori are a particularly vulnerable actor in this debate. We think that they are likely going to want to protect the environment, and we are able to deliver that on site affirmative.
I thank the speaker for their speech. I now invite the second speaker of the negative team.
Affirmative expects us to believe that putting a band-aid on a long-term issue that will continue to affect the world for centuries will be the ultimate fix to the climate crisis as we know it. We told you over and over in our first speaker's speech about why on our side of the house we get both better short-term impacts and long-term impacts, and why this passing of the fast track bill is overall really negative to democracy and should be weighed really highly in this debate. Okay. Four main things in my speech today. Firstly, on the energy crisis. Secondly, on which side gets better environmental outcomes. Thirdly, on democracy. And then finally, I'm going to split and talk about why on our side of the house we get an improvement of the people's perception of the government. Okay. First of all, on the energy crisis. Now, this was the main push from the affirmative side. Note how their main thing has been about people, like, we're relying too much on coal, we're relying too much on, like, non-sustainable energy. Now, on our side of the house, we are not trying to fight for consistent coal usage. On our side of the house, we are trying to find sustainable ways to be producing renewable energies without just instantly putting a windmill randomly in the middle of a rural area without consulting local iwi. What we are trying to do on our side of the house is find a way to find renewable energy that will not negatively impact people in the long term. We are trying to actually solve the climate crisis on our side of the house, and with that comes the solving of the energy crisis. They tell us that it just simply takes too long, and this is just overall really negative. Now, we tell you in response to this that it is better on our side of the house when you actually invest in research and development and take a longer time, right? Now, it's unlikely to, like, the reason why it should be doing, we get it better on our side of the house is because it takes a long time, because of the amount of research and thought that goes into it. On our side of the house, we see people actually consulting climate companies. We see people actually consulting climate activists. We see that people just simply overall have better data and have just more consideration of the place they're going to be building in. They also tell us that we can combat the climate crisis because, like, the local council just doesn't have resources to be doing this. Now, see, the thing is, on our side of the house it's better because now we have consultation with local council. Now, if you want to believe that the local council just doesn't have the resources, we see that on our side of the house it is better for the climate when the government directly communicates with local councils, when they actually, like, see people who grew up in the area and are going to be directly impacted by this. Why is this only specific to our side of the house? Well, on our side of the house, on their side of the house, we see that the government's likely trying to get things out as quickly as possible. They're not likely going to be consulting with many people because they're trying to just push out as many projects as possible. It is not likely they're going to be taking every single detail. It is unlikely they're actually going to be considering the like minor harms that will end up building up until we end up with a catastrophe in the long term, overall making it worse for the poor, vulnerable people who are living in those houses when suddenly they no longer have access to any energy because their short-term fix completely screwed them over. They also try to tell us that they're going to be reducing the cost to making things. Now, first of all, this is untrue in the way that if we want to believe that on their side of the house we're going to get equal quality projects, it is likely to do this quickly. Take way too many resources because you're trying to produce so many things quickly. You're going to have to increase costs. You're going to have to employ so many more scientists. You're just going to have to overall increase costs. This will then result in, like, higher costs for the consumers, which is overall even worse because to get, like, the quality energy, you're going to have to pay even more. Now, besides this, if we do believe that they're going to have, like, lower costs, we will end up then with, like, reduced quality projects in the way that is just overall bad for the environment because there was not as much investment in research and development, because we didn't actually see consultation. We just didn't see any actual means taken into actually considering a quality project because they're just trying to push out as many as possible. We finally hear, like, the only response we hear to, like, they just tell us it's just not going to be low quality energy. What we tell you on our side of the house is that if it's not low quality energy, it's going to be low quality projects, because a project that was decided in 10 minutes decided in 1 month is going to be infinitely more harmful than one that was thought about for a whole year, one that was actually researched, and one that actually consulted iwi groups. Secondly, then, on the environmental outcomes. Now, the things we hear on their side of the house is that renewable energy will be the main supply. Now, why is it unlikely that on their side of the house is going to be the main supply? So on their side of the house, it's not, as I said before, it is unlikely going to be good quality because it is a short-term fix. We're pushing out projects quickly. We're making it so that we're solving it so quickly. So even, like, the only benefit we get on their side of the house is one that is extremely short-term, that maybe will benefit, like, at their best, will benefit, like, the local community for, like, a year before it collapses and completely, like, corrodes their rivers and ruins their soil, and just overall is just really negative because, like, they were happy for, like, 1 year, but then have to solve the issue of a really bad quality project for years after that, leading to overall really negative environmental outcomes on their side. They also tell us that, like, another thing with this is that we do believe that renewable energy should be a good thing. Now, it's just like, we believe that we want to keep this on our side of the house as well. However, the way that we will actually give you tangible outcomes on our side of the house is that we see that we are having well thought out projects. We are seeing that we are having people actually researching, like, actual scientists considering every step of the way. The reason we have all these resource checks and the reason we have all these consent forms in check is to ensure that we do not end up screwing over our country. The reason they are there is simply because people know that the environment is a really fragile thing. If we do this, will completely screw everything over. Finally, then, on democracy. Now, thirdly, then, on democracy. We told you on our side of the house over and over why the fast track bill is a completely compromising democracy in the way that it is giving complete power of renewable projects to 3 main ministers. The things that we hear on their side of the house is that people still have a say, and ministers are likely going to be listening because they don't want a bad outcome. Now, firstly, now why is it that the ministers are unlikely going to be listening? We already gave you a few responses at first as to why they will not be listening, from the way that they likely only want to get out projects fast, and from the way we already told you all this. But also we see that the only reasons they give us that the ministers will be listening is that they want to maintain their voter base. Now, the ministers in charge are national MPs, right? So maintaining their voter base is their voter base simply is already people who are right wing. Their voter base isn't a group that largely cares all too much about the climate crisis. So they're not likely going to be affected all too much by this. The people that are severely harmed by this are the minority groups that are not represented by the 3 ministers in cabinet or by the people controlling all of this. They are the most affected people in this debate. And once you take away all power from them and give it to 3 main ministers, you are completely stripping them of any power they have of their own ancestral land and completely just ruining them as a whole. They tell us that there will be benefit to iwi because they're going to be able to make their own energy. Now, they're not going to be making their own energy because these companies will not be owned by Māori. They will still be owned by large corporations because suddenly now they have a fast track bill. It's not likely you're suddenly going to have all these grassroots Māori energy companies who are going to be doing all this. And you're also building on stolen land. Now, why finally on our side of the house do we get better perception of the government? Now, there's already a severe backlash about the fast track approval bill when people were considering it too rushed, and it was just a slap in the face to iwi groups. And we saw that there was minimized discussion with climate groups where activists had to come out and say that this minister is the face of the climate war. Why then is it better on our side of the house? We see that when we scrap this bill, we show that the government is willing to listen to the people because there was so much backlash. Once we scrap this bill, we see that the government is actually willing to listen, and they're actually willing to actually take in consideration and keep democracy. We also see that we're allowing more people to know that their voice is heard. Once we allow this, they're more likely to speak up on more issues that they care about. So overall, we see that people make more informative voting decisions because they truly look at the party that listens to them. And on our side of the house, you should stand with our side of the house because we are the side that gets tangible climate outcomes, that gets actual outcomes for iwi, and is overall beneficial. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for their speech, and now invite up the third speaker of the Affirmative team.
Three questions I'll be answering in today's debate. Firstly, will the policies work and effectively be passed? Secondly, the importance of democracies and people's say. And thirdly, a small clash about minority voices. Firstly then, about will these policies work and be passed, it's important that this is incredibly important for the debate because as we have proved to you, the nationalisation of this process, because of all of its resources and all of its public backing, is going to be far more effective, and this bleeds into democracy because more people have a say in national elections. They have more people, the larger voter base, more people buy in. What have we heard thus far? We have heard that we are going to get about things such as low quality energy because this is going to be a fast track process. Note here, we've never heard any sort of analysis as to what these low quality energy looks like. I think en masse we can prove that hydroelectricity, no matter the quality of it, is still going to be vastly more effective than coal mines, which are going to run out in the next 20 years. But more charitably, on their push about how we're going to get these dams that just fall down and all these constructional projects, this is like sense check here. We still can stand for like these work and safety laws that like think that like the bare minimum of safety that like it stays up is still in place. But even if we don't get that, companies are incentivized to and ministers are incentivized to have good projects. We have 3 reasons for this. Firstly, land is scarce, and therefore ministers will want to pick the best projects in order to go on like the scarce land. We are a small country though. Secondly, as we've pointed out from first, there is a high competition mechanism as we now have more companies wanting to push their projects out, which means you're likely to get the best project to win. Thirdly though, we want to have good energy because it improves export markets. This is one extremely unresponded to because the value of our land and the quality of it directly relates to our tourism industry and our dairy exporting industry, the main earners in New Zealand. If we are able to keep this land far into the future, these ministers are extremely incentivized to do that. Right. And secondly then, about the sort of the nationalisation is slow because like ministers have multiple commitments. Firstly, they're politicians, and this is like their job. They're used to handling multiple commitments at once. But secondly, this is a high-profile issue. Like, we're literally debating it in 2024 Nats Championship. Like, it's going to be something people care about. Like, which means this issue is likely to be brought up at the next election to see if it's worth. This is literally like Nationals Kiwi build. Thirdly, though, about sort of area-specific knowledge and that, like, how they believe people from the regions are going to have more knowledge, right? Firstly, we believe this is largely symmetric at the point in which, like, all these experts are likely to know land. They know how, like, rivers work and they know how, like arable land works. But this is asymmetric on our side, and we improve this because we are getting the top quality experts, not just, like, Joe down the road who owns, like, a dairy farm. These are people who have got qualifications, gone to high-level universities. That's incredibly important. Secondly, our material, Isabella still stands about these places being under-resourced. This is especially important in rural areas who are most susceptible to climate change. They do not have the infrastructure to deal with this, right? Thirdly, though, never mind, I'll address that later. Okay, fourthly though, on investing in R&D is more important, which we heard that at second. R&D takes literally forever. You have to have trials, you have to have bureaucracy if we want to improve this technology, which as we've proven to you, you don't really need to. We have all the building blocks there. We have the Manapuri Dam, we have all the blueprint. We just need to get there in time. We have the tools to make it. We don't have the time to do it. The New Zealand environment in 2040 is not going to be the beautiful Aotearoa that we know today. It is going to be flood-stricken. Okay, lastly though, is because they think we're going to get an increased cost of scientists and whatnot because this is on such short notice. We believe this is a area of high demand, and which means that like more people want to opt into getting degrees and things that address climate policy. We're likely to get more engineers. We have this with university scholarships. It's really lastly though, about this point about like how regional people on the regional council are going to be more likely to know about like the area and have more knowledge. Just to build on this, these people are likely wealthy. We told you this at Isabella because these like people in the middle classes don't really care about regional elections. Therefore, uniquely, the people that run for them are people with large networks within these small communities, people who live on hills, people who live in a house on stilts, people who won't be affected by climate change. It's not at the top of their mind. Second point then, about undermining democracy. Yes, I'll take a point first.
Do you not, since you agree that there is scarce land in New Zealand, do you not think then that the government will then be stealing ancestral Māori land to be...
My third point of clash. Right. People say, we believe that people say is not going to be undermined at the point in which democracy is eroded when people literally cannot get to the polling booths. But even if, we can still win this clash and say that democracy en masse is probably not as important as people keeping their lives and keeping their homes. Right. What have they said under this? They believe that people say is important, especially because National doesn't really care about people affected by climate change. Note, this is not entirely true. New Zealand is a largely progressive country and most of us believe in climate change. Uniquely, National voters do care about their land at the point in which their dairy farmers that vote for them probably want to keep their careers in the next 20 years. So what actually undermines democracy then on their side of the house? We believe it's people being locked out of the system geographically because the roads are so bad, or losing trust in the system because the conditions have gotten so much worse due to the impending energy crisis and due to other issues. Secondly then, they believe that it's going to be, we're going to have a more diverse council because it's more likely to be in the middle class. Already flagged why this isn't true, right? But we believe we have like structural reasons as to why people are less likely to vote in regional elections. Firstly, it's low scale, people don't see it as important, and B, these politicians like usually like campaign a lot less. People just like genuinely don't know the elections are going on. They're not as politically aware as we are. Therefore, we are more likely to have more democracy on our side of the house because people care about the national elections. They see these big scale policies like fast track and they genuinely want to buy into them because they have all these flash names behind them like Christopher Luxon and a point of national discussion. At the end of this, we have proven to you how people say is amplified on our side of the house, and even if it's not, we can say that it is not important at the point at which we have to get things done before the permafrost in other areas of the world like gets completely demolished and none of us can survive. Lastly then, on my marginalized voices. As we've heard, they've tried to say that like minorities don't don't care about like minorities and therefore like won't respect their land. Firstly, we believe like non-Māori can also feel passionate about issues concerning like Māori people, but secondly and more importantly, these are usually the type of people that swing elections when you like have two main parties and like one of them needs to go for the other. Because these people have been locked out of democracy the most, we want these people to vote more. Lastly then, they tried to claim that iwi voices are overlaws. Firstly, as we gave Judd and Shika, laws surrounding iwi consultation already exist, but secondly, if that's not good enough, we believe that like there's precautions that these ministers would want to consult iwi because that we've had huge scandals in which they haven't. Take when Craigie Range wanted to build a bike track on Te Mata Peak, which had huge backlash from Ngāti Kahungunu and therefore like was effectively removed. They have huge amounts of political capital, like which has gone completely unengaged with on the negative side. At the end of this debate, who was the team that told you who was going to keep those families alive and keep them warm? It was Team Hawke's Bay.
I thank the speaker for their speech and now invite up the third speaker of the negative team.
The most important thing in this debate is ensuring that the future generations who are most susceptible and most prone to harms from climate change have access to infrastructure that was actually well thought out, that's actually beneficial for the region in which they live, for the local council in which they're affected. We tell you that is the most important thing. The environmental incomes are what impact the people of the future. That's what should be weighed the most highly in this debate. A couple of questions to ask in this debate. Firstly, on the environmental outcomes and who actually leads to benefits for the environment. Secondly, on the energy crisis, and thirdly, on minorities and listening to the community. As I just flagged in the introduction, we think that the environmental outcomes are the most important thing here because they're the things that are impacting the most people in the future, right? The energy crisis is a very short-term thing to be focusing on. We say that the environmental outcomes are what's impacting people and biodiversity and communities for the future and the present for years to come. So the first thing to cover then on environmental outcomes is on the comparison between councils and these ministers on who's actually going to care or has an incentive to care about the environment. That basically all we hear here is that no one cares about regional elections. No, there's pretty much only at Third Ave. Firstly, we tell you everyone cares about regional elections, right? It's actually related to personal, close issues, right? When the issue that these people are campaigning for is about the river down the road from you compared to tax rates that probably don't even affect you. I think people are considerably more engaged in regional councils. They probably care considerably more about that and are going to be way more bought in to that, right? We take that these national issues are so broad, so politically driven, people feel locked out of that people don't engage in that as much. Secondly, we show there's way more accountability for council members, right? Since national elections are driven by political alignment, since people tend to just like vote for the right-wing electorate or whatever it is, just because like that's what their political alignment is, regardless of who they are as a person, we show that the comparatives that councillors are voted in based on the impact that they have on the community, based on like the amount of people that they actually benefit, because there isn't that like political incentive there, right? So we tell you that like there's way more accountability for councillors, so they have more of an incentive to actually like appeal to the voters like views here. So then a couple of things on environmental outcomes. The first thing we hear is that renewable projects become like the main source of energy. Firstly, we tell you that since these ministers are unlikely to even be approving these projects because they don't have an incentive to care about the environment, right? We tell you that it's unlikely that it's even going to be their number one priority. These ministers don't really like expensive projects. They probably just want to like do what's best for the economy, like since they're like from like national and stuff. So we tell you that like if they're not approved, you're never actually getting renewable projects. But secondly, we tell you that even if they do get equal approval, that's just not mutually exclusive. We still get renewable projects on our side to the same extent because they're like there's still a method of like approving them on our side. Second thing that we hear is that like renewable sources are environmentally friendly. Firstly, like obviously, although the production of energy is eco-friendly here, the harm that we need to like consider is the fact that when you're building them, like there's like massive harms that could be like made to like biodiversity, to communities, right, to like water supply. We tell you that when you have more voices taken into account necessarily because you've got this like larger council group, you have like more perspectives of these local issues taken into account. You have the perspectives of all the people who are going to be impacted rather than just, oh, it's renewable, we better build it regardless. But secondly, we tell you that these renewable sources need to be effective in the long run to actually have maximum impact. We said that taking a bit more time in the short run to approve this project and ensuring that it's actually the most beneficial that it can be for the environment is the most important thing here, because like that means that we actually have infrastructure for the future to allow people to access this like these environmental benefits. We tell you that if you like don't spend the time to make sure that these projects are perfect, which necessarily happens when you're just incentivized by rushing through a fast track project, you don't get this effectiveness and you don't get the benefits in the long run. The third thing that we hear is that like the details about the location don't apply, so there's not much to be taken into account there, like a dam's a dam basically. But like it's so important to note here that the location applies so much in these regards, right? Building a dam is having impacts on the biodiversity of the river on which it's built, the water supply of the people who rely on this river, right? We show that if these three ministers just accept that building a hydroelectric dam regardless of the specific species at risk and the flow-on effects to local communities. Like if they just accept that this hydroelectric dam should be built in the name of like, oh, it's renewable, we said that never actually leads to benefits because there's way more at harm than just like the climate change. We tell you that like they lead to having like species going extinct. We say they lead to like communities having no water supply. We say that that is the harm in this state. But secondly, even if somehow these locational details don't matter, and basically if you really believe that the same template dam can just like be built everywhere in Auckland, like Hawke's Bay, Hamilton, regardless, we still need more from AF on why these projects are actually going to be approved. We already told you why that's unlikely. So at the end of this then, I think we proved that like we could provide considerably better environmental outcomes by taking our time in the short run, by taking account the perspectives of everybody in the local community. We said that that is what leads to the best long-term benefits for the environment. The second thing here is on combating the energy crisis. Before I move on, I'll take a point.
How do we meet Paris Climate Accord?
Sorry, I don't know what that is, so I'm just not going to engage with that. All right, the second thing then is on the combating the energy crisis. Note this is incredibly short term, right? I think it's important to note here that if all we cared about was just like reducing the prices for energy in the short term, we wouldn't be building like $10 million dams in the first place. We just start pumping out more coal. Because if all we care about is a short-term benefit, it's like a short-term fix to a long-term issue, I don't even think that renewable sources are in question here.
You are.
No, thank you. So a couple of things that we hear here. And the main thing is that these projects are built sooner and therefore like you get people saving their money sooner. Firstly, we tell you that these three ministers don't have more available resources than the councils because it's literally just like only 3 people. But secondly, like we tell you that it's longer under AF because there's probably like more processes to undergo when you're literally like cabinet ministers compared to like a council where you're like having meetings often. The next thing that we hear is that since it's a new law, there's more of a focus on it. Firstly, there's just not lots of new laws coming around all the time, but secondly, that doesn't last forever. As soon as the next law comes around, that'll be the focus. I'm unsure why that has any impact on the debate. Thirdly, then we hear that reducing that you reduce costs because the council is to employ heaps of people, and reducing the cost is really important. Firstly, you still have to employ these experts, right? They're highly educated, they're going to be demanding high pay. We tell you that they actually increase costs on their side. Secondly, we tell you they also increase costs because of the fact that there's more of an incentive to rush through and get through it quickly. You're probably going to have a lower quality project, or at least have to spend more on maintenance in the long run. That increases your costs. But thirdly, we tell you it's literally the businesses that are putting forward these projects, that are building it either way. They still have to pay just as much because they're still making the same thing. But fourthly, we tell you that even if it is cheaper, that just doesn't matter. We don't care about the profit margins of these companies. That's just not what matters in this debate. What matters is actually getting environmental change for the people of the future. We show that even if AF gets all the benefits of having these projects quicker, we simply outweigh this by the lack of consideration for the long-term benefits that necessarily occurs when you're just rushing through these issues. Lastly then, on the who listens more to the community and the impact on minorities. The first thing we hear is that ministers listen more because they want to maintain their voter base. Firstly, people don't care about what the ministers are doing in resource consent. They probably care more about the bigger issues like tax rates and stuff. But secondly, we say that people vote for local representation for their ability to listen to their ideas. That never happens on their side because of these political incentives. Since we're the side that actually benefits the environment in the long run, I'm so proud to negate it.
I thank the speaker for their speech. Now, as customary, we switch the speaking orders, so I invite the leader of the negative team to come up and in their team's place.
We meet the Paris Accord when we're able to solve climate change in the first place and in the long term, rather than just having these short-term benefits that people can get, in their best case, $2 off their electricity per month, rather than actually solving these issues that hurt people in general, right? Everyone is affected by climate change. Even though these people say, certain people can't afford the electricity, we tell you that this slight change doesn't make a difference in general, and renewable energy wouldn't be the discussion here because that's the most expensive form of energy. These companies have the most expensive forms. The cheaper forms are the non-renewables that are not discussed in this debate. Firstly, on the environmental outcomes, and secondly, on the social outcomes, and then thirdly, on the energy crisis. Firstly, on environmental outcomes. We win this debate when we prove that these projects on our side are of higher quality to the point that they last longer, right? This long-term fix is the most important part of the debate where it can stand, and even so, they get more maintenance, which means that you get higher costs in general, right? So what are the long-term impacts? This wasn't highly contested by AF. They just told us that they have better and faster projects, so we think they're trying to win on the short term. But even so, firstly, we get higher quality projects because they get the best location, the best use of materials, or the best practices during construction. Note, this is so important that we get the best practices during this construction, because construction of these things are often damage the environment to a significant extent, right? So we want to reduce this by putting research and having local communities have a say in what impacts the community the most. If they want to win on long-term impacts on energy crisis, the fact that they have lower quality means that there's less best practices that are used in this construction. It means that then they have to go back and maintain and spend more money to maintain this kind of these projects and these facilities, which means that they don't even get the benefits of the cost in general if they want to claim the long term. So then on short-term impacts, right? There are two possible alternatives of what you could buy in this debate. Firstly, that they are able to construct really quickly, they're able to produce energy, which means that concessions are made, like environmental practices that harm the local area. area because it is cheaper and because it's quicker to get those resources. When you have really environmental things, these things are harder to get. Secondly, you could buy our material that is actually far harder to solve the issue itself in the short term, in which we weigh out all the short-term benefits, because the main debate here is about whether we can solve climate change, whether we can improve it to any extent. Okay, secondly now on the social outcomes of the energy crisis. Firstly on the benefits to the minorities, and then secondly the perspective of the general public. What did we hear on minorities? Firstly, they told us that they care about, the government will care about minorities because they feel obligated to. We gave you so many reasons as to why local perspectives are listened to, and the fact that local communities want to get these perspectives of the minority, right? When the minority are voting in a national election, they know that their voices aren't as heard because they are the minority. In a local perspective, they can lobby or talk a lot to these local people so they know their perspective. Secondly, they told us that iwi can make their own energy. Since check here, iwi literally are part of the community. They literally make money from, they literally go and get energy from these really large companies. We don't see how they can just make their own energy. And secondly, they care most when the government who has historically been shunning them out of society, not caring about their perspectives, and now making decisions of what resources can be used in their area, what they can gain out of their area, right? We think that multi-perspectives are based around what you get out of the land in a natural way, in which when you do this, that it damages their land. We think this is where they get the biggest harm, where they feel excluded, and when that you are literally harming the most vulnerable of the population. Thirdly, on energy crisis, right? The main push is that they get cheaper energy in general. We push back by telling you this is flipped because there's rapid fire construction diving headfirst, and even if the change doesn't cost, if the cost doesn't change, it is very minimal. These people are more affected by the environmental climate issues themselves, right? And since check again, people who can't afford electricity go to companies that are the cheapest, and this minimal change literally doesn't do anything for these people. So proud to oppose.
I thank the speaker for the speech. Now invite up the leader of the Affirmative team to close their team's case.
In this debate, the Negating team have painted themselves as the team of the future. But we on the AF have proven that we care both about the short term and the long term. But critically, we cannot have the long term when climate change and the environment is a short term issue, when people dying of the cold due to an energy crisis is a short term issue. So that is the first point of question in this debate is about how we get more energy of high quality in the short term and long term, and what kind. Secondly, on minority voices, and just lastly on democracy. So starting off with on the energy that we are able to produce. In terms of speed, we have proven throughout this debate that because a panel of 12 specifically is only focusing on one project, because we have the top experts working on it, because we have so much resource being pumped into a centralised government, we are able to approve projects at speed. Whereas critically on their side of the house, we have under-resourced councillors that are bombarded with so much information that they are having to deal with so much at one time that consenting processes are literally taking a decade. We bring that up in Anshika and it has gone uncontested. They did not give us another time frame. They have not proven that, oh well, it's only going to take a month. It is taking a decade. In terms of quality, the main pushback was to just say, okay, you get energy quickly, but it's going to be of low quality. I think what we tell you is that firstly, there's competition between companies that is created because you are now having more companies producing energy, more companies doing renewable projects. That has gone unresponded to. Secondly, there are personal incentives on companies not to want to have a building that is going to collapse. We talked about shareholders. And thirdly, we tell you that the top experts who have the resources have large knowledge. This panel is not going to just allow a building to be built that is going to collapse. And just lastly, even if we get low quality projects, and even if they still can't paint themselves as the team of the future, because the alternative is coal. Coal is our backup supply, and we have told you down the line that coal is a finite resource and it is going to run out. So ultimately, we are able to do things such as fix the energy crisis because we get more energy, it is cheaper, and we are less reliant on foreign powers such as Russia, such as all of the oil companies, such as Indonesia, which we spoke about at Anshika. Secondly, we also are able to reduce pollution, which causes mass respiratory illnesses, and we are able to critically meet our climate goals on the side of Affirmative. In terms of environmental damage, they basically told us that we basically told you that environmental damage is so small because it is just like a few number of really impactful renewable energy projects, and we also gave you responses about how local iwi is still involved because the bill specifically says that they have to be, and also because you are involving experts, you are likely to be able to prevent environmental damage much more effectively on our side of the house. Second point of clash, I think, is about minority voices. We basically tell you that I think the most thing that matters for minorities is probably that you're able to survive and you have electricity to keep you warm, right? We gave you a whole split about how Māori are disproportionately effective. We create a mechanism for iwi to create their own power companies, create their own renewable electricity that just simply doesn't seem to have been understood by the negating side. But secondly, they told us that oh no, minorities now have no voice. We've talked about how Māori have political capital, about how they must be consulted, about how they are able to protest in the streets. There are multiple other mechanisms, and we just think that even if they don't exist, the most critical thing in this debate is that they are able to survive and be kept warm. And just lastly on democracy, we think this was mostly dropped down the line and we did not hear it in the leader's reply. But basically democracy, they told us, is hugely impeded. I think this is completely weighed out when Bex tells you that polling booths being flooded, being unable to vote, just means that democracy doesn't matter anymore. And secondly, you are still able to vote in national elections, which are going to decide the kind of party and the kind of ministers that are going to be making these decisions. We still are able to get democracy on side affirmative.
I thank the speaker for their speech. I now invite both teams to cross the floor and shake hands. Thank you. Great job. Good job. Thank you so much.